This is Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. My name is Lucía Benavides, and today we're talking about Catalan architect Lluís Domènech y Montaner. Considered the father of Catalan modernism, Domènech y Montaner is best known for designing Barcelona's famous Palau de la Música Catalana and the Sant Pau Hospital, both of which are UNESCO World Heritage sites. He was a renowned professor and a key figure in Catalan politics. This week marks 100 years since his death on December 27, 1923. On today's episode, we'll hear from experts focusing on Domènech y Montaner's life as an architect and as a politician. Here to help us learn about his life is reporter Beliaeva. Hi, Lea.
Hi, Lucía.
Let's start by dispelling the myth that Antoni Gaudí, the famous architect behind the Sagrada Familia and Parc Güell, many other buildings, that he's the father of Catalan modernism. That's not the case, right?
No, that's not the case at all. In fact, Gaudí was a student of Domènech.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Gaudí studied at the school where Domènech y Montaner was a teacher, but they were very close in age. They were only 3 years apart.
Because it was the same time period.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So maybe that's a part of the confusion, but actually Domènech y Montaner was the mastermind, if we can say that, of Catalan modernism.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And tell me a little bit about him. When was he born? What's his background? How did he get into architecture?
Domènech y Montaner was born in Barcelona in 1850. He was born into an upper middle class family that were owners of a publishing house and a bookbinding company. And he studied architecture in Madrid and in Barcelona. And then also he realized that he wanted to create something unique for Catalan architecture, something proper. And another thing about Domènech y Montaner was that he was very academic in his approach. So everything was very well studied. Nothing was left to just...
like the chance or by accident.
Yeah, nothing at all. Everything was meticulous. And then because he was so academic in his approach, he became actually a teacher of a newly created school in Barcelona in 1875. He had great visions. Not only was he a great teacher, but he really had great ideas of what architecture was supposed to be. Yeah. And as an example of that, when he became a teacher, he actually changed the whole curriculum of the school to include subjects as optics, acoustics, and geology that were to become very important for the construction of the Palau de la Música Catalana. And he also included subjects related to hygiene and ventilation and natural light. And those three topics were very important to the later construction of the Hospital Sant Pau that we're going to talk about later. Right.
And these subjects, these themes, I think you can see the influence that it had on Gaudí as a student, because these are, if you visited Sagrada Familia, you know that light is a huge thing, that acoustics is a huge thing, so you can see kind of the influence he had
for sure.
On probably a lot of architects, not just Gaudí. He's just the most famous one.
Yes.
Yeah. And so speaking of Gaudí and this group of artists, they are known to take part in what's called Catalan modernism. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, so Catalan modernism is an architectural and art movement that took place between 1885 and 1920, approximately.
Okay.
But today we're only going to center the conversation around architecture.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it was basically an eclectic style of references from the past, from the Catalan architectural past, but with a modern twist, and also very, very important, an ornamental twist or
yes.
a focus on
Definitely.
decoration and decorative elements.
Yeah, and colors.
And colors.
Yeah.
Colors and just an abundance of everything, basically. So I would like to give some specific examples of some references that were important in the architecture.
Okay.
One of them is the classical style from the Roman times, but the modernist twist is that these columns were decorated with ceramic flowers.
Yeah.
And then the Gothic references that we see are the big windows that we just talked about. But the twist is the stained glass.
Yeah, the beautiful designs, yeah.
Yeah, and if you just go to La Sagrada Familia, for example, you can see just when the light comes in, all the different colors. One of the other elements was the patios, which was, well, Romantic style, but also before that, the Arabic style.
Right. Yeah.
And that was a very big element, particularly in Domènech i Montaner, that when he created houses, he always included big patios.
Yeah.
And the pavement was many times made of mosaic, which is also a Romantic Arabic tradition. And a very characteristic part of modernist architecture is the Romantic references of iconography on the walls. Because when we think about iconography, we think about Romantic churches.
Right, religious things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the modernist twist to this is that instead of the religious iconography, you see flowers.
Yeah.
Flowers everywhere, and it can be tiles, it can be just ceramics, it can be, well, different kind of techniques. The last example that I want to give you for something that's very, very specific for the modernist architecture is the use of iron. Okay. So here, in the modernist architecture, this was the first time that they used iron, but as a decorative part.
Okay, because before, how was it
Well,
used?
before it was just industrial or to build structures. But now if you walk around, for example, in the city of Barcelona, you can see many of the old markets or even, well, all kinds of buildings that use iron to create flowers or different shapes.
Yeah, it's a decorative technique.
It's a decorative technique.
Yeah, definitely. But can you give some example of Domènech i Montaner's creations and buildings and
what you mentioned before, Lucía, the Palau de la Música Catalana.
Yeah, in the Born neighborhood. In case some people don't know where it is, you've probably seen it. Yeah, it's that huge building, very colorful. With, if you've been inside, there's a gigantic horse.
Yeah, and it's just it's an amazing example of modernism. It really is. Which, of course, I suppose that's why it's also on the World Heritage list, right? Because
very unique. It
is very unique. And then, of course, there's the Hospital Sant Pau that we're going to talk about shortly. So that's in Barcelona city, but we mustn't forget the rest of Catalonia.
Yeah.
And here, Domènech i Montaner has a trail.
Really?
A large trail of his style and his legacy. Yeah. So Reus would be a very, very important city to mention. And it is the second capital of Catalan modernism.
Oh, wow.
So that means that when you go to Reus, you will see a lot of modernist buildings.
Really interesting.
And they have also a modernist root.
Yeah.
The funny thing about Reus is that this was where he built, Domènech i Montaner built the Institut per Amata, which was a psychiatric hospital. And it was the precursor to Hospital Sant Pau.
Okay.
So he just made, well, everything he did in Institut per Amata, he basically did bigger, or the plan was to do it bigger in Sant Pau.
Yeah, and Hospital Sant Pau is actually, we mentioned earlier, one of his most famous works. If anyone has walked past, even if you didn't know about Domènech i Montaner, this building probably caught your eye because it's hard to miss.
It's very hard to miss. It's huge and it's beautiful and very, very colorful.
Yeah.
And actually, I went there and I talked to archivist Miquel Terreo about the history and the use of this old hospital.
Well, let's hear what he said.
Hospital Sant Pau was one of the crown jewels in Lluís Domènech i Montaner's career. The architect was commissioned to build the state-of-the-art hospital to reflect the highest standards of public health and sanitation. Built between 1901 and 1930, the hospital complex is made up of 12 separate pavilions connected through an underground system of tunnels and surrounded by large open spaces with gardens. But what was the main inspiration for Domènech i Montaner?
Good morning to you, and welcome to the Hospital de la Santa Creu i Sant Pau. Let me introduce myself. I am Lluís Domènech, architect at your service.
This is the recreated voice of Domènech i Montaner at the San Salvador Pavilion, which visitors can talk to in several languages through a hologram of the late architect.
This thing about inspiration, I believe that an architect, first of all, must focus on the function, and from there he must collect the aesthetic principles from the past eras that suited best, without renouncing modern technical innovations.
Miquel Terreu, archivist at Sant Pau, says hygiene was the main focus of the architect when building the hospital.
The idea was that it had to be a place that was healthy for the patients. Not only because this is where medicine happened, but also because the ambience as well, the atmosphere had to be clean, had to be hygienic.
The hygienic atmosphere was created by installing big windows to create ventilation and let in natural light year-round, thanks to the hospital's east-west orientation. This light, as well as the decorations of the pavilion's walls and ceilings, was intended to create an atmosphere that would encourage patients to improve emotionally, explains Miquel Terreu as he shows one of the restored pavilions.
Because Domènech is very conscious of the importance of having an agreeable ambience for the patients even when they are in bed. So he decorates all the ceilings and walls with, again, flowers, but also because he's also very conscious that it has to be a hospital, and to make sure that it will be still an hygienic space, he covers it with tiles, with flat tiles.
Domènech i Montaner used flowers and nature in his architecture as a decorative motif. At the Hospital Sant Pau, he also planted different trees and flora outside between the pavilions, as he thought they would have a therapeutic effect on the patients. Just as with his architecture, nothing was coincidental.
See, between one pavilion and the next one, there is this big surface, and Domènech decides to plant trees on both sides. On the south side, which is always on the shadow, trees more adapted to winter, to it this way, and on the north side, which most of the year will be in the sun, summer species.
The hospital was included on the UNESCO World Heritage list in 1997, when it was still a functioning hospital. In 2009, the hospital closed and then was restored as a modernist site that preserves and explores the history of the hospital and the architecture of Domènech i Montaner.
Thank you to Miquel Terreu for speaking with us. Now, even though Domènech i Montaner is best known for his architectural work and his time as a professor, he was also, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, a politician, which is a bit of a surprise. Can you tell me how he got involved in politics and why?
Yeah, so he got involved very young, at 21 years old.
Wow.
And this was in the midst of the Catalan Renaixença, that means the literary and cultural movement that sought to revive the Catalan language that until then had been basically suppressed for around 100 years.
Yeah.
So he decided that he wanted to do something, but on two fronts. So architecturally, that we've talked about, and then also politically, or as some sort of an activist or writer. He was a founder of various associations in Barcelona, and he founded various papers and magazines, and he was a very active contributor also to the Catalan Renaixença movement of writing in Catalan.
Yeah.
And in 1878, he published an article that was called In Search of a National Architecture. So here he was writing about, like, what can we do to find something to rediscover and revive something proper. And at some point he also went to Madrid as a congressman for 4 years. And ideologically he was on the center conservative spectrum so that means he wanted a free Catalonia, more rights or just rights and as a whole, and also self-determination and prosperity. But then over the years, he became increasingly Republican. But he was also far from being an anarchist. So at the end of his life, he was a center-left Republican.
Right. Okay. And we should mention that this is right before the Second Republic was founded in Spain, which eventually led to the Spanish Civil War. So
Yeah. So, and some people say actually that he was very ahead of his time in terms of politics.
Right.
I talked to Carla Saiz, a historian and writer at the research center called Centre d'Estudis de Lluís Domènech i Montaner.
Domènech és un personatge íntegre i que utilitza
Domènech i Montaner was a well-rounded person who used all his virtues to serve his country. He took from the various fields that he had studied and mixed this knowledge together, but the end goal was the fatherland. During his studies of Catalan architectural history, Domènech i Montaner realized that he needed to take it a step further if he really wanted to make a difference.
Però de seguida se n'adona que anant amb el lliri a la mà i anant a fent excursions per veure què maca és Catalunya i com...
He realized early on that going on excursions to look at how pretty Catalonia was or to observe Catalan churches would not lead him anywhere, Saiz explains. So, Domènech i Montaner quickly got behind the politicization of this Catalanism and took part in the political action. In 1891, he co-founded the group Unió Catalanista and became its president, and 1 year later, the political program known as Las Bases de Manresa was approved. Inspired by federalism, the program proclaimed Catalonia as a sovereign country with Catalan as the official language and re-established the Catalan parliament, Las Corts Catalanes. This document is widely regarded as the birth of political Catalanism. But despite being a part of the political inner circle at the time, Domènech i Montaner was never a purebred politician, according to Saiz.
Serà un home que creurà de conviccions i que, a més, mai acabarà acatant la disciplina de partit.
He was a man who acted according to his beliefs, Saiz says, but he would never get to the point of accepting the party discipline. Domènech i Montaner was against the 1914 creation of the Catalan Commonwealth by his old party colleagues from the Catalan Regionalist League because he saw it as a minimum agreement that didn't focus enough on what he thought was the most important goal, the creation of a Catalan Republic within a federal framework.
És, de fet, un autèntic visionari, perquè ell quan mor el 23 encara faltaran...
Actually, he was a real visionary, says Saiz, because he died in 1923, 8 years before the proclamation of the Catalan Republic and the reinstatement of the Republican Parliament by Catalan President Francesc Macià.
Thank you to Carla Saiz for speaking with us. So we mentioned earlier how most people think of Antoni Gaudí as the father of Catalan modernism. He's definitely the most famous one worldwide. But I'm curious why more people don't know about Domènech i Montaner, since he is the father of Catalan modernism. He's the one that kind of led this movement.
Yeah, it's actually a big mystery. Everybody I asked, they didn't have an answer to why. But I've been thinking about it, and I think that Gaudí is so famous because he has been in the spotlight because of La Sagrada Familia,
right,
that has been 140 years in the making and still not done. So it keeps getting headlines, right? Now they have built this other tower, now they have done these different things. And also, he was much more playful in his architectural style. Gaudí. He used many more colors, different textures, and you couldn't always see what everything was architecturally. Whereas with Domènech i Montaner, you can always see what everything is. You can always see, okay, this is a column, this is a window, just highly, highly decorated.
More practical
than
Gaudí,
And then another very important thing is that in the modernist technique, they used a lot of brick.
Right.
And now we have exposed brick everywhere. But at the time they didn't, so it was a novelty. But now when we walk down the street, we don't really pay that much attention to it.
Right.
And
yeah, we take it for granted.
We
now.
take it
yeah,
for granted.
it's nothing
And then
new.
when we compare it to Gaudí, that technique still really stands out today in a different way.
Okay.
So I think that maybe that is something that could explain why everybody knows Gaudí.
Yeah.
And unfortunately not the father,
Right.
Domènech and Montaner.
Yeah. It's like the man behind the man.
Exactly.
As opposed to the woman behind the man, which is usually the person that gets lost in history.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier about Sagrada Familia, it's also just become such a symbol for Barcelona. Like when you see pictures of Barcelona, it's Sagrada Familia. It does stick out like, I don't know how many feet in the air or meters in the air for European measurements. But, you know, and I guess Domènech and Montaner's buildings are a little bit more
subtle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Subtle,
although not
but
extremely subtle because
Exactly,
you definitely notice them.
We definitely notice them. And also when you just walk inside, you're overwhelmed by all the different textures, the flowers, everything.
Yeah.
So the word subtle is also quite relative when we talk about modernism and Domènech and Montaner.
For sure. And hopefully this podcast will get him more fans.
Fingers crossed.
It's time now for our Catalan phrase of the week. What is it, Leah?
Alt com un Sant Pau.
Okay, so I'm getting some Hospital Sant Pau references here.
Exactly.
But what does that mean?
It means to be very tall.
Okay, so it's literally it means to be tall like Sant Pau,
Yes.
who is Saint Paul.
Saint Paul. So apparently,
I
I
guess
guess he was tall.
Apparently, we'll have to look into it. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Leah, for your reporting. Thank you also to Miquel and Carlas for speaking with us. We'll be back next Saturday with another episode of Filling the Sink. In the meantime, you can catch Catalan news on social media or email us at fillingthesink@acn.cat. On behalf of the entire team here at Catalan News, I'm Lucía Benavides, wishing you a wonderful weekend. Goodbye, ciao, adeu.